Habermas clashes with Zizek on Hegel's knowledge. Habermas, a critical theorist in the Frankfurt School, was not fucking woke, as pseudo-intellectual crackpot James Lindsay says in the Philosophical Discourse of Modernity. Habermas wrote about the idealist philosopher Hegel's supposed system of absolute knowledge. The famous Hegelian, Lacanian, Marxist philosopher who I talk about all the time, Slavoj Zizek, has a great criticism of Hegel's system of absolute knowledge. In his book that I recently did a video on, check that out. It's on the book called Less Than Nothing. So, in the Philosophical Discourse of Modernity, Habermas actually has a good response to this in defense of Hegel. Habermas gets into Hegel's view on the dialectic of the Enlightenment, which a lot of people have heard of. In Hegel's system of absolute knowledge, there's what Habermas calls a vestibule of philosophy. I like this term. Within the presupposition of the absolute. Hegel's system of absolute knowledge is his attempt at a philosophy of unification. It's meant to allow us to use our reason to arrive at truths about philosophy, God, religion, being, existence, knowledge, etc. We must use the power of our reason to fight back against our modern era, which is being torn asunder. The mythological version so the fake news version of Hegel's reconciliation with modernity was still tied to ancient models like primitive Christianity, not all of Christianity. However, according to Habermas, Hegel's system of absolute knowledge was the only way for Hegel to go beyond the rational religion, romantic art, and bourgeois society of the Enlightenment. His system of absolute knowledge was actually the only way for him to escape ancient religious models, according to him. But Hegel thinks that we can overcome the problem of subjectivity in his system of absolute knowledge with the philosophy of a subject. This obviously begs many fucking major questions that Zizek asked in my video on Hegel's system of absolute knowledge. As he himself admits, Hegel, it relies on subjectivity, but wouldn't absolute knowledge need to be objective? So Hegel is trying to achieve objective knowledge from a subjective perspective? How can Hegel arrive at objective absolute knowledge from a subjective perspective? To be clear, Zizek's dismissal of absolute knowledge doesn't seem to have come from Habermas. I just noticed it. Zizek's criticism was much more recent, obviously. However, I think that he just came to that conclusion without realizing that Habermas had made it. I could be wrong, though, of course, and he obviously knows way more about fucking Habermas in general than me, like infinitely more. But anyway, Habermas at first smacks down Hegel's system of absolute knowledge, but then he offers a defense of it. Habermas points out the consequences of Hegel's system not working. Hegel attempts to use absolute knowledge to criticize modernity, but since his system fails, this makes a successful critique of modernity impossible. This also makes the self-understanding of modernity impossible. But then, Habermas actually saves Hegel's system of absolute knowledge from destruction, or even from deconstruction. Habermas obviously doesn't mention Zizek, like I said. However, he points out that other philosophers' attempted takedown of subjectivity is puffed up into an absolute power. It ironically turns into a reproach of Hegel against the limits of critics who haven't yet understood Hegel or the course of history. So, Habermas gets into criticisms of Hegel's system of absolute knowledge in connection to critiques of modernity. Then he offers a defense of it. This type of smackdown of the system of absolute knowledge is exactly the same as what Zizek expresses. How the fuck can we gain what should be objective absolute knowledge from a subjective perspective? Well, Habermas argues that Hegel's system of absolute knowledge is the only way for him to overcome the rational religion, romantic art, and bourgeois society of the Enlightenment. Hegel thinks that we can get past the problem of these subjective ancient religious models with not subjectivity, but a philosophy of the subject. But seriously, Hegel, Can you really attain objective knowledge from a subjective perspective? Can you even get there with the philosophy of the subject? And if Hegel's system of absolute knowledge fails, it makes a successful criticism of modernity impossible, apparently. But after his thorough steel man, Habermas arguably fucking destroys these attempted criticisms. He makes a crucial point that these attempted critiques turn subjectivity into an absolute power. They make it a more powerful criticism than it actually is. The absolute power of a destruction of subjectivity becomes an assault on Hegel himself. To Habermas, it shows the limits of philosophers who disagree with Hegel on this subject because they just don't understand Hegel or the way history works, which a lot of philosophers say, obviously. You guys tell me whether you think Habermas's defense actually trumps critiques of Hegel's system of absolute knowledge based on subjectivity. I don't think it actually does, but you decide. Anyway, Habermas clashes with Zizek on Hegel's system of absolute knowledge.